The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Elena's penthouse, casting long, golden streaks across the polished floors, and though the city below hummed with its usual energy, she felt an unusual stillness, a moment suspended between the remnants of yesterday's danger and the anticipation of what the day might bring. And as she moved through the familiar spaces of her home, she could not shake the memory of Adrian's presence, his calm strength, the way he had instinctively shielded her during the chaos, and she realized that every glance she now cast over her shoulder, every small movement, was tinged with an awareness of him, a subtle acknowledgement of the unspoken bond that had begun to form between them. Adrian, as always, maintained his professional distance, yet his eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary on her as she prepared for the day, noting the careful precision of her movements, the small gestures that betrayed her nerves, and the way her focus shifted between practical concerns and the emotional undercurrent that had developed over the past days. He reminded himself repeatedly that this was his job, that attachment could compromise both safety and judgment, yet each time Elena smiled absent-mindedly or her gaze met his across a room, the walls he had so carefully constructed around his emotions threatened to crumble. The morning passed with cautious routine, breakfast served, schedules reviewed, security protocols double-checked. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered, subtle and insistent, as if every word exchanged carried more weight than it should, and every silence was laden with a promise of something neither dared name aloud. Later, when she left for a corporate event, the city streets seemed unusually vivid, the crowds bustling yet oblivious to the undercurrent of danger and desire that accompanied her, and Adrian's presence just behind her was a constant reminder of both her vulnerability and the strange, inexplicable comfort that came from knowing someone was there solely for her protection. At the event itself, Elena navigated a room filled with influential faces, champagne flutes, and polite laughter, but her attention often strayed to Adrian, who maintained a quiet, vigilant stance near the edges of the gathering, scanning the space for any hint of trouble, and she found herself strangely reassured by his watchful eyes, feeling both the thrill of the night and a strange warmth she could not yet categorize. The evening's calm was shattered by the subtle shift in the atmosphere, a man lingering too long near the entrance, a glance that didn't match the joviality of the crowd, and Adrian's reaction was instantaneous, his hand resting lightly but firmly on her back as he maneuvered her towards safety, his presence his solid barrier between her and potential harm. And in that fleeting moment, the line between professional protection and personal connection blurred irrevocably. Once the event concluded and they returned to the penthouse, the tension of the night lingered in the air like an unspoken acknowledgement that their lives had become intertwined in ways neither could fully comprehend. And while Adrian meticulously reviewed the night's security logs, Elena found herself pacing, the adrenaline from danger mixing with the undeniable pull she felt toward him, a mix of gratitude, fascination, and something more intimate that both thrilled and terrified her. As they shared a quiet meal later, the city lights spilling through the windows, conversation drifted toward lighter topics, small talk that nevertheless allowed for subtle glances and fleeting touches that neither could completely suppress. And each interaction, though carefully moderated, carried the weight of a growing unspoken emotional connection. The night deepened, and Elena, unable to sleep, wandered onto the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin, the city sprawling endlessly below, and Adrian joined her silently, standing just a few feet away, his presence commanding yet unobtrusive, and in the quiet, the unspoken words between them grew louder than any conversation could be. For a long while they watched the city, the rhythm of life below mirrored by the beating of their own hearts, both aware that the trust and intimacy developing between them was dangerous, complicated, yet utterly inevitable, and each passing second reinforced the magnetic pull neither could resist. A sudden alert from Adrian's earpiece broke the silence, signaling a minor security concern, and he instinctively moved to guide Elena to safety, the familiar choreography of protective instinct and careful movement, reminding them both of the fragility of the world around them and the fragility of the boundary they had so carefully maintained. Back inside, the adrenaline slowly faded, leaving in its wake a charged stillness, and Elena, driven by a mix of courage and curiosity, addressed the tension directly, asking him questions that skirted personal territory but demanded honest answers, and Adrian, caught between restraint and revelation, shared just enough to allow a window into his past, his values, and the discipline that had shaped him into the man she had come to rely upon, all while maintaining the professional composure that made him both enigmatic and magnetic. Hours later, as they prepared to part for the night, Elena lingered at the doorway, her gaze searching his face, recognizing for the first time that the bond forming between them was not merely circumstantial, but deeply rooted in mutual dependence, respect, and a growing undeniable attraction. And Adrian, sensing her hesitation and acknowledging his own conflicted emotions, allowed a brief, careful smile, a rare softness that spoke volumes without words, reinforcing the silent understanding that something profound had begun, something that would challenge every rule he had lived by and every boundary she had ever enforced around her heart. Alone in her room, Elena reflected on the evening, on the moments of proximity and subtle touch, on the safety and exhilaration that had coexisted all day, and she realized with startling clarity that her feelings for Adrian were no longer those of a client merely reliant on protection, but of a woman experiencing the first undeniable stirrings of desire, trust, and intimacy, emotions that were both exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. And she knew that the days ahead would require vigilance, courage, and perhaps the willingness to surrender to the inevitable, for the bond that had formed between them was no longer something that could be neatly categorized or confined to professional boundaries. In the stillness before sleep, both Adrian and Elena wrestled silently with the consequences of their growing attachment, aware that the line between duty and emotion had blurred irrevocably, and that the events of the past days had set in motion a trajectory neither could control.